Hello, so today we're diving into unhelpful thinking patterns or cognitive distortions, if you want the more official term. This video comes to you from Autistic Guide to the Galaxy, but remember, you don't need to be autistic to get something out of this. Autistic traits are just human traits. This is stuff everyone experiences, just in different ways at different intensities. In this video, we're going to look at how your brain can trick you sometimes. Your thoughts aren't always telling you the truth, which I think is absolutely wild when you think about it. So stick around, keep it light, and let's get that wee dopamine hit from learning something useful. So, what are unhelpful thinking patterns? Well, they're automatic thoughts that your brain generates without you consciously choosing them. So, they're built from past experiences, your beliefs, your environment, and your emotional learning history. Your brain is constantly predicting what's happening around you, and it does so by using what it already knows. So instead of analysing every single situation from scratch, what it does is it pulls and drags in stored patterns and it just fills the gaps quickly. And from a brain's perspective, this is more efficient because it saves time and energy. Rather than working carefully, it works quickly. But it also means that your thoughts can often be based on past data, assumptions, and emotional memory, not what's actually happening right now. Now, every human brain does this. It's universal. It's not a flaw, it's just a built in feature of how the brain or cognition works. So, your brain and everyone else's brain is constantly interpreting, predicting, and making sense of the world around them. And these patterns are part of normal information processing. They just become unhelpful when they're inaccurate or they're too rigid, they get too stuck. So the goal is never to actually stop having these thoughts. I mean, it would be nice, but you can't. It's always going to happen. But the goal is mostly to recognize them and to respond differently and to challenge them. And that's how we grow and, I guess, have sort of more helpful thinking patterns. So, why do they happen? Well, your brain has two main priorities: one, to keep you safe, and two, to conserve energy. To do that, what it does is it uses those mental shortcuts that I was talking about. And the actual term for that is called heuristics. And it helps quickly interpret situations. And these shortcuts, if you imagine them like if you're a computer person, if you imagine like Control Z, rather than having it go up to like edit and undo, click on the buttons, you can just quickly Control Z or Command Z if you're on a Mac, and you can do the quick shortcut. So for the brain, these shortcuts are based on past experiences, especially emotional ones. But the brain also has a built in bias towards detecting threat, and that's because it's trying to keep you safe. So it's much more sensitive to negative information because evolutionarily that's what kept us safe. So, what that means is that your brain is more likely to notice and remember and react to things that feel risky or uncertain, even if the threat's actually low. Okay, so who experiences them more? As I've said, I've put on everyone is welcome here sign there because I need to really, really stress that this is everybody's brain does this. This is as common as breathing. It's just part of cognition and the way that the brain works. But some people do it more often. So some people experience the patterns more frequently and more intensely, and it's usually linked to how the brain processes information, handles uncertainty, and responds to emotional input. So there's a few examples there, but for example, like anxiety, your brain's more in tune to detecting potential threats, so your patterns show up more maybe catastrophising or mind reading or overestimating risks, because the brain's trying to predict what could go wrong before it happens. And maybe in depression, there's a stronger focus on negative information. So patterns like discounting positive or overgeneralizing or negative labeling tend to be more common because your brain's likely holding on to these negative interpretations. Things like trauma, your brain learns to associate certain cues with danger. So things like catastrophizing, hypervigilance, and emotional reason show up more because the brain's prioritising safety based on the past experiences, even in new situations. And for autistic people, Things like the detailed way of the process information, the pattern recognition, and rigid interpretations of things can make all or nothing thinking happen or overgeneralization more noticeable. And the thoughts can feel maybe quite logical and consistent, but they're not complete. So across all of them, the examples here, it's not that the patterns are unique to one group. It's just certain patterns might show up more often, might feel more convincing, depending on how your brain's processing information. And if you belong to multiple groups, so if you're an autistic person with co-occurring ADHD, anxiety and depression, which we know is a very common experience, and let's say you've also experienced trauma, again, another common experience, and let's say you're under stress, you might be a parent, you might be having financial concerns, you might have a new job or be stressed in your own job or moving house or just have a difficult home environment, or you're under stress because of any other factor in your life, your thought patterns are going to be probably more frequently using all of these shortcuts because your brain is processing information in so many different ways and under so much stress. So you can really see how different things can affect it there. Okay, so very important point. More frequent, more intense, it doesn't mean more fixed. So growth is possible for everyone. Your brain, everybody's brains, learns these patterns over time, and it's learned through repetition. So the more that you have a certain type of thought, the more that you use a certain type of thought, the stronger that neural pathway becomes in your brain. And it's called neuroplasticity. And so what that means is where your brain's got billions of little connections happening inside your head, little electric connections. And every time you use one, it strengthens that connection. So the good news is neuroplasticity works both ways. So if you stop using that connection as much and you start using a different connection, new patterns are built. So you just need to repeat practice. Even if the old ones feel really automatic right now, and I can tell you this from experience, it's not easy at all. I am not preaching that this is, if you know this now, tomorrow you'll be better. Like, that's not what I'm preaching at all. This is a long time in the making. But if you start now, your brain will start to use different patterns because you're using different patterns, and you can have healthier, less distressing thought patterns used as habit rather than these. It's distressing when you're out and about, because I'm not like trying to preach that you should change. I don't think anybody needs fixed or changed. I don't think you're broken. I don't think anyone's inherently broken. But I do think that these thought patterns, for many people that I work with, are difficult and distressing. If you're always going into a situation and you're always thinking the worst case scenario, you are in, like, you're always in survival mode. You're always sort of fighting for survival. So yeah, moving forward here, like, you can build new patterns, but you have to keep practicing it. You can't just do it once and be like, oh, it didn't work for me. That's not how things work. Okay, so for autistic people and thinking patterns, autistic people often notice more detail and they pick up on patterns very quickly. There's also a lot of people report a strong preference for things to be quite clear and make sense. So uncertainty and grey areas can kind of feel quite uncomfortable and overwhelming. So what the brain tries to do to reduce that uncertainty is to put things into categories. So like right or wrong, good or bad, safe or unsafe. And that's where unhelpful thinking patterns come in. So for example, all or nothing thinking can show up because it removes that grey area, it removes that uncertainty. And overgeneralizing can happen because the brain's trying to turn patterns into clear rules. But these patterns aren't random. They're the brain trying to create this clarity and predictability to make it feel easier. and less overwhelming. But in doing that, what it does is it simplifies things too much and it misses important context. So the thinking feels clear and certain, it feels very logical, but it doesn't mean it's accurate all the time. Okay, so another really important message: being autistic, or any other neurotype for that matter, doesn't mean that you can't learn and grow. And this includes learning to notice and challenge unhelpful thinking patterns. For most people, it's a skill that develops over time through repetition, through experience, and through practice. And it won't look the same for everyone. It won't always be easy, as I've said, it won't be immediate. But the ability to build awareness and respond differently to thoughts is something that many people can develop in their own way. Right, let's have a look at some common thinking patterns. Okay, so example number one is all or nothing thinking. So you might have heard this said before as black and white thinking, but it's basically where your brain puts things into extremes. So you might think of things like either good or bad, or a success or a failure, or right or wrong. And the reason why the brain does that is just because it's faster and easier, and it sorts things into nice, clear categories, and it helps deal with those grey areas that are quite uncomfortable, or ambiguity, as people say. Um, like the need for like something to be either this or that. It can't be in the middle because that's uncertain. But unfortunately, in real life, that's where life happens most of the time, is in grey areas, and you can't categorize things this or that, because it's not how real life works. And this pattern completely ignores that. So what happens is it tends to make really small mistakes feel really big, and makes it quite hard to see progress as well. So I've got a couple of examples. So you might write something, like write a message or something, and you make a typo, and then you feel like, oh, I've ruined it because you made a typo. When in reality, the whole message is like quite sound. Like they'll probably be able to read around the typo as well, but you feel like you've ruined the message. Another example might be, you might have a conversation with somebody, and your brain labels the whole interaction as a failure because you might have one awkward moment or say something really awkward. And in reality, again, it's just one split second of a conversation. And the whole conversation was most likely okay, but you need the conversation to be, or the interaction to be, either good or bad. And if it doesn't fit into that, because it was a mixture of good, but there was a slight awkward moment, your brain will put it into usually the negative context and be like, that was a bad interaction. And, that might not always be true. Okay, example number two, catastrophizing. So this is when your brain jumps straight to worst possible outcome. So it's a part of your brain that's actually trying to keep you safe, and it asks, like, what's the worst that could happen? But instead of stopping there, it treats worst case scenario like it's likely or inevitable. So if you imagine, like, I call this anxiety fuel. And if you imagine, like, anxiety, having a mild sort of buzz of anxiety, I don't see a problem with that. I think most people would agree. Anxiety and anxious thoughts are usually your brain saying, like, what's the consequences here? What am I missing here? Or what could I be missing? And it gets you to kind of go over the decisions you're about to make. It gets you to risk analyze a little bit. Too much anxiety is a problem, as I'm sure everybody knows. It's really, really distressing. It stops you doing most things. So catastrophizing, if you imagine in your brain you've got this little fire of anxiety, just a little flame. Catastrophizing is like coming in, this thought pattern comes in and just pours petrol on top of that fire. And instead of being like, oh, do you know what's the worst that could happen? It goes, what's the worst that could happen? Oh my God, that's happening now. It's happening right now. And it makes situations feel so intense, more intense than they actually even are or are likely to ever be. It just goes worst case scenario, and then you're there. And you start to visualize it. You might even start to panic, like, oh my God, I'm manifesting it now at this point. So wee things like even short replies from someone. So an example could be like, someone might message you back and it's not the usual way that they message you. And you might start to be like, oh my God, they're annoyed at me, I've done something wrong. Or you might make a small mistake at work and then overthink it to the point of oblivion, be like, oh my God, I'm going to get sacked. You go home, spend all night rehearsing how you're going to deal with this the next day. You get in and nobody's even remembered it, or it's just a light like, oh, let's not do that again. Another really common time when people catastrophize is around sort of health anxieties. So you might find you'll have a physical symptom and then you start to sort of think like, oh, what's the worst that could happen? What's the worst it could be? Oh my God, what if it's that? And then next thing you know, you're on Google, you've diagnosed yourself with about 5 terminal illnesses, and you've already, considered your funeral plans. You're in such a state of panic and anxiety and distress that you actually could end up making yourself unwell. But yeah, it's just worst case scenario, and the brain just goes immediately, boom, straight from 0 to 100, worst case scenario, finished. Okay, so moving on, we've got mind reading. So this is when your brain assumes that it knows what other people are thinking. Now, humans are social, albeit to different degrees. So your brain is always trying to work out what other people are all about, basically. So we use like their reactions, their tone, their behaviours, what they're into. And this actually links quite well into something called theory of mind, if you've not heard about that before, which is your ability to imagine what someone else might be thinking or feeling. And again, just like everything else, everybody has different degrees of theory of mind. Some people are able to do it a bit better and some people just aren't. There's loads of different reasons for that. And but that's for another video. But it's useful. It helps with communication and it helps with relationships. But the problem is, you don't actually have access to other people's thoughts. So when information's missing, your brain fills it in with gaps. But it also fills it in with gaps that are negative guesses. So especially if you're already feeling quite uncertain or uncomfortable. So imagine you're around somebody and you're not really sure of them. You're feeling uncomfortable. You might be a bit overwhelmed in the environment. You don't know what they're thinking. You don't really know them that well. Your brain is honestly probably just going to go ultimately to that they are thinking horrible things about you. And those guesses can feel quite real and quite convincing, especially if you get just a little bit of feedback, such as maybe they've got a different tone that you're not used to, and it maybe sounds a little bit abrupt. Your brain will take that tiny piece of information and be like, yep, that's it, solidified. That's the evidence I needed there. They hate me. They're thinking horrible things about me. Or maybe somebody might reply, maybe they don't reply straight away and your brain thinks they're ignoring me. But they're maybe just busy. The key thing to understand is that these are always guesses. You can never make a 100% correct judgment. And you'll never know whether what you think is right unless you ask the person. And even then, you might not get the truth. So they're always just guesses. You can make educated guesses about what they're thinking, but you'll never know for sure. But what mind reading does is it treats those guesses as if they're facts. Okay, so next is overgeneralizing. Now, this is one of my favourites to talk about because I see it so often. I would say this is the most common, from my perspective, the single most common unhelpful thinking pattern across all groups, across all humans. And I don't think that any single group, I don't even think any single group actually overgeneralizes more than others. I think it's just a thing that's like as like a widespread thing. This is all over the media. This is everywhere. So this is when your brain takes one experience or some experiences and turns it into a rule about everything. So it takes some or one or some and turns them into all or most. And I guess the reason why is because your brain's built to spot patterns, and that's how you learn and it's how you make sense of the world. But sometimes what it does is it tries to build a pattern from too little information. So one experience becomes this always happens, or this is just how things are. And it's actually really closely linked to how stereotypes form. So if the brain sees a few similar examples, or it's repeatedly shown the same idea, it starts to group them together and treat them as one rule. And media plays a massive role here too, because if there's certain stories or behaviours or types of people that are shown in the same way over and over, what your brain starts to do, or what the public brain starts to do, is it expects that pattern even if it's not accurate. So overgeneralizing is not just random, it's your brain trying to simplify the world by creating a quick, predictable rule. The problem, obviously, is that those rules are far too broad. They miss very important differences, they miss context, and they can affect how you see yourself, how you can see other people, and what you can expect to happen. So, for example, let's say that you've had a few conversations where people didn't really respond much. Like your brain might start to expect that most conversations will always go the same way. So it'll overgeneralize that because of these few conversations, conversations will all go that way. And just to add on to that one, before I should give you another example, it's really important to recognize that socializing is a skill. People aren't just automatically good at socializing. It's a skill that you have to build up, and to build the skill, you have to be in social situations. So if you're a person that doesn't really like a lot of social interaction, by default, you're going to have less experience and less practice in social situations because you don't go into as many. Bearing in mind, somebody that's really, really social probably goes into double, maybe triple the amount of social situations that somebody that's really likes quiet time, maybe a bit introverted, likes their own space, maybe gets overwhelmed by social scenarios, or just genuinely just doesn't have a need to be around people that often. It's a drainer rather than a energizer. So yeah, keep that in mind, that more social people might seem like they're doing it better, but they've just had more practice. They've practiced the skill more. Anyway, moving on. So another example might be that a couple of people cancel plans on you and you start to assume that people are just generally quite unreliable. Or you most likely see one type of behavior from a group in the media. So your brain starts to expect that from people in real life. Okay, so lastly, we're going to look at discounting the positive. So this is when your brain ignores or downplays things that went well and it focuses more on what didn't. Many people tend to notice this and remember negative information more easily than positive information. And this is usually linked to how the brain responds to potential problems or risks. So negative experiences just stand out a bit more. This pattern's actually often talked about in depression, where negative information carries more weight and it sort of sticks more strongly, but it can actually show up in everyday situations, especially if you're overwhelmed or stressed or overstimulated. So when your brain and body's in that state, your focus kind of narrows into what feels uncomfortable or difficult, and it can be much harder to take in any positive information at the same time. But over time, what happens is this leads to an unbalanced view of yourself and your experiences. So, to give you an example, somebody might compliment your work and you might think, oh, they're just being nice. Or they might compliment your hair and you might just think, oh, they're just trying to make conversation. Or you might have a mostly good day, but because you're overwhelmed, your brain focuses on the most uncomfortable moments and it struggles to look at any of the positives that you've had of that day. Okay, so challenging the pattern. If you're still here, well done. If you need to pause the video, go and have a quick break, drink of water, cup of tea, fresh air. What we're going to talk about now is challenging the pattern. Step 1, notice the thought. So, as with everything, the first step is awareness. You need to identify when your brain is switched into automatic mode. And hand on heart, this is the hardest part of the whole thing. I stand by the statement, I don't know who said it, but awareness is half the battle. It's really difficult when you're in an emotional state, when you're highly reactive or in a reactive state. If you're in fight or flight, if you're uncomfortable, if you're distressed, if you're dysregulated, if you're overwhelmed, if you're overstimulated, it is really difficult to stop and say, hey, I'm using an automatic thinking pattern here. I should do something about it. That's really, really hard. So it needs to be done over and over and over, and you also need to be really light on yourself, not like, oh, you have to do it and then it has to work every time. You have to be really patient. And when I say it takes practice, I don't mean just a few times. You need to be continuously doing this before you'll actually start to habitually do it. So what I mean by that is do it by second nature before your brain actually says, oh, I'm doing that thing again. But when you're aware of what you're doing or aware of how your brain is thinking, what you do is you interrupt the pattern slightly. And what it does is it gives you a chance to respond instead of react. And that's the most important part, is it gives you that pause button. Step 2 is to name the pattern. So what you want to do is you want to label the thought, and that helps shift it from something from your inside to something that you're just observing. So it's actually like metacognition, which again is a video for another day. But what it does is it reduces emotional intensity. It takes it away from being personal, and it activates a reflective thinking process. So you could, once you're aware of what it is, you could then look at the cheat sheet, which I'll provide at the end of the video, that you can download as a PDF. You look at the cheat sheet and say, right, which one of these patterns is it, and name the pattern that you are using. Step 3 is check the evidence. So what you want to do is look at what actually supports this thought. So you ask yourself, what evidence do I have for this, and what evidence might go against it? And this should help you move out of automatic thinking into more deliberate thinking and intentional thinking. So you're not trying to prove the thought wrong, you're weighing up both sides of the picture. So what supports it and what does not support it. You just want to see if this is an accurate thought or not. Step 4, try a balanced thought. So now try to come up with a more balanced version of the thought. Now, it's not about forcing something positive or just pretending that everything's fine. It's about being more accurate and less extreme. So a balanced thought usually includes maybe a little bit more context, and it leaves a little bit more room for more than one possibility. Because remember, we don't want to think in extremes. We don't want to jump into black and white thinking it is either this or it is this. We might want to look for that area in the middle. Okay, so let's look at an example. So let's say that you make a mistake or something doesn't go how you wanted it to, and your first thought is, I've completely messed this up, I'm absolutely useless. That thought will show up really quickly, and it will feel true in the moment. You'll probably think, yeah, that's true, I am useless, I have messed this up. But there's usually a strong emotional reaction attached to it as well. So you might feel like frustrated or embarrassed or disappointed. It might even just feel like full up anger. So step 1, you would notice the thought. So rather than just going along with this thought, the thought happens. If you imagine it like a cloud in the sky, you notice the cloud, you notice its shape. So you pause and you recognize, that's a thought I'm having right now. Don't try and change it, just notice it. The next thing you're going to do is go to step 2. So what kind of thought is this I'm having? So that's when you would go to your cheat sheet and you think, right, in this case, for our example only, this is all or nothing thinking. You've taken a situation and you've turned it into a full-on judgment that because it's not went the way that you want it to go, you're a failure and you've messed up. It's also a little bit of overgeneralizing as well, because you've went from like, this didn't go well, to I'm just useless as a person. I'm just a useless person. Full stop. So you've named it, and you can say to yourself, this is a pattern, not a fact. This is just an unhelpful thinking pattern that I have. We know why you have it now. You know why you have it because you've watched this video. And then the next thing you'll want is step 3. So you'll think, right, okay, let's slow it down a bit and think, what is actually true here? What is the evidence that I've got that this is true? Well, something didn't go well. But what did your brain do with it? It took that and it made a massive mountain out of it, and it said, you turned it into something didn't go well into this means that something about your whole worth or your whole ability. So when you break it down like that, you see that there's a massive gap in the conclusion that your brain came to. You see that your brain just made something up out of nothing. It went from something didn't go the way I wanted it to I am absolutely terrible and useless. It just made that out of that thought. So you say, right, okay, I've recognised that, I've named it, and I've looked at the evidence. Now we try step 4, where we choose a balanced thought. So let's come up with something more accurate. It doesn't have to be overly positive, and it doesn't need to pretend that everything's amazing. That's just toxic positivity. You just want it to be more realistic. And it's as simple as, that didn't go how I wanted it to, but I can learn from it. So you acknowledge the mistake, because you've made a mistake, and that's okay, that's part of life. But you don't need to judge yourself. It's not a fixed judgment about you or your ability. So it's the same situation, you're just interpreting it differently. And that changes how you feel about it and what you're likely to do next. So instead of shutting down or becoming overly critical of yourself, you're more likely to reflect, adjust, and try again. And that reflection is the most important part here, because what you've learned from this scenario is, instead of attacking yourself for it, you're saying, what did I learn here and how can I use it moving forward, so that next time I might not make this mistake again because I've learned. Okay, so remember, practice matters. This all works through repetition. Your brain strengthens the patterns it uses most often. So the thoughts that you repeat the most will start to feel the most natural with time. And that's how learning works in the brain. The more you use the pathway, remember, the stronger it becomes. So think back to neuroplasticity that you learned about earlier. And when you start practicing it, you're not just thinking differently, you're actually building these new patterns. So remember, it will feel, at first, it can feel really slow, it can feel a bit forced. And it's just because your brain is used to using the old pattern. So it will start to feel easier the more you use it. And we'll finish on the most important message, which is, be patient with yourself. This is not something that will change overnight. It's something that takes a really, really long time. It's not something you'll even do all the time. You might find yourself sort of doing it at the start when things are most distressing. So maybe when you have a really uncomfortable feeling, that might be the best time to start. But even noticing the thought or pausing for a second before you react is progress, especially if you're quite a highly reactive person, or if you have the thought and immediately you can sort of feel that pounding in your chest or that feeling at the pit of your stomach, and it just completely takes over your reaction and your behaviour. It's all progress. So it might not feel like much in the moment, but small shifts matter, and they're part of how the new pattern builds over time. So you don't need to get it perfect. You just need to keep noticing, keep practicing. Your brain will always generate thoughts automatically. It never switches off. It's a human cognition. That's just how the brain works. And thoughts will still show up quickly. They'll still feel convincing. But you'll just get better at recognizing which ones are helpful and which ones are just very quick shortcuts that might have been even programmed differently based on your past experiences, or based on how you feel in the moment, or based on your emotions. So the goal is not to control every thought, it's just to have more awareness and have a choice in how you respond to them. Hey! If you're still here, congratulations, you made it to the end. It's over. Well, it's not really over, but the video's over. So download the cheat sheet, the PDF cheat sheet. It's just all of the unhelpful thinking patterns, just to remind you what they are, and so that when you're having thoughts, if you think it might be an unhelpful pattern, or if it makes you feel really horrible about yourself, then the likelihood is that it probably is. So run to your cheat sheet, have it on your fridge. Like, you don't need to keep it there forever, but just until you get into the habit of, reminding yourself that it exists, keep it on the fridge, keep it somewhere that you can access it. Take a picture of it on your phone, keep it on your phone, and I don't know, remind yourself to look at it. Set a calendar reminder to get yourself to look at it, I don't know, once a week, once a day, depending on how committed you are, depending on how intense your thoughts are. Everything's personal. So thanks for watching. I hope you've learned something really useful, and I hope it helps you moving forward. Feedback always welcome. Be kind. Bye.
Back to reality.